obviously, and very importantly for all of our employees, our faculty and professional staff. So on this occasion, given that I had the luxury of deciding what the format would be, I decided that we would invite four panelists who represent four different constituencies of the college to talk about wellness in the time of COVID from their perspective. I borrowed that title as an adaptation of the very famous novel by Colombian author Gabriel Garcia Marquez, Love in the Time of Cholera. And I note that there was already a TV show in 2020 called Love in the Time of Corona. So we're borrowing those punchy titles to juxtapose what is a real challenge for us all in so many ways, i.e. COVID-19 and the vicissitudes of a pandemic, along with wellness, which is really the bottom line behind all of the protocols in place, but also in our deep desire that everyone actually has a very positive year this year. So it is an apparent contradiction in terms, an apparent oxymoron or paradox to talk about wellness in the time of COVID, but I actually can't think of anything more important or a more important tack to take on it than that particular approach. So recent research conducted on high school graduates in the class of 2021 found that on the whole, they were exhausted but optimistic. I think that finding is true of most of us. So we're going to try to find good reasons to be optimistic today by listening to our four experts in their own realm who will talk to us about how we can search for and realize wellness despite all of the constraints and the maddening anxieties and the unknowns that we have to live with. There is so much outside of our control that I think we need to assume responsibility for what is in our control. And very importantly, while we have all been through the ringer and each of us has had our own particular set of challenges, a combination of isolation and family care and lack of resources and frustration and the unknowns, we also have to find our own happiness and figure out how to make life worth living under really difficult circumstances. So I've asked a student, a professional staff member, an alumna of F&M, and one of our newest faculty members to speak today. I am going to introduce them all briefly, and then I have a set of questions for them. So I will get them speaking as a panel, but also as individuals from their own perspectives. And I'd like now to introduce them. And panelists, if you would be so good as to turn your cameras on when I introduce you, that would be very nice indeed. I'd like to have people see you. This isn't the same as being in Mazer Gym altogether, but it's not so bad. We've gotten better at it. So let me now introduce our four panelists. The first is student Rachel Rubins, class of 2024. Rachel is a sophomore student at F&M. She intends to major in government and American studies and to do a minor in sociology as well. Outside of academics, Rachel is involved in mock trial, in Kappa Delta sorority, in the F&M ACLU, and on the Student Conduct Committee. Rachel was also the first guest featured on the F&M Wellness Pod in the episode titled The First Year Transition. Welcome, Rachel. So glad you're here.
Thank you for having me.
It's exciting. And you're good at these media opportunities, as I know firsthand.
Thank you so much.
Our second guest is Dr. Vicki Zuckerman, class of 86. Dr. Zuckerman is an alumna of F&M, and she earned her PhD in clinical psychology from Yeshiva University. She lives in Lancaster, and she currently has a private practice in which she sees children and adolescents for educational testing and for psychotherapy. Vicki also serves as a member of the Alumni Association Board. In June, Dr. Zuckerman participated in a presentation for a series called Diplomat Dialogues. That series is organized by the Alumni Association, and it's dedicated to sharing resources, supporting wellness, and encouraging lifelong learning with all members of the F&M community. In that session, Vicki interviewed another alumna, Sarah Faraone from the class of 2000, who is the program director at the International Coalition of Sites of Conscience. Their conversation focused on topics related to healthy communication practices. In fact, the session was titled Communication, Maintaining Healthy Relationships. And it was about starting and maintaining effective dialogues and opening up conversations about tough topics. Clearly a very relevant thing that all of us are negotiating now as well, that we're all back on campus. Our third panelist, and let me just say a quick welcome to Vicki. Hello, Vicki. I haven't seen you in person in quite a while. It's good to have you here. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Our third panelist is a brand new faculty member, Professor Adeem Suhail. Professor Suhail is a cultural anthropologist who earned his PhD from Emory University very recently in 2019. His research is based on ethnographic fieldwork in urban South Asia and in the Persian Gulf region. And it addresses questions about structures of violence, the politics of sacrifice, and transnational mobility. He really just did arrive at F&M, and we're delighted to have him with us. His area of expertise could not be more pertinent to us all right now. And I noted with great interest when it was announced to students that he is teaching a course this semester titled Crisis Care Repair, the Arts of Care and Repair, in which the class will explore how diverse practices of care and repair may address our collective impasses. And with that sentence, I was quoting from the course description. Welcome, dear colleagues. So glad you could be with us for this.
Wonderful to be here. Thank you so much.
Our fourth panelist is Susan Knoll, well known to many of us as our campus care coordinator. Susan runs DIP Cares, which is our campus referral system for students who might be struggling and about whom others might have concern. DIP Cares is a team of campus staff who meet once a week to review referrals and to make sure we do outreach to students who are struggling with any number of a whole wide range of issues. That team also works hard to ensure that students, faculty, staff, and parents are aware of and have access to the wide range of resources available on campus. If you were on campus last year or studying remotely, you will have seen all kinds of useful communications from Susan about ways to stay connected and to stay healthy. Susan has a background in social work, not surprisingly, in a whole variety of educational settings. Susan, thank you for being here. I can't think of anyone who does this work day in, day out more than you do.
Thank you so much. I'm really happy to be a part of this panel.
So, dear panelists, I'm going to start with a question that I'm going to address to all four of you, and I'm going to invite you to jump in. Whoever wants to go first can volunteer and so on. And then I have some more specific questions for each of you. So here is the first question for you, because I want to make sure that we do not lose sight of the concept of joy, even in the midst of everything else going on. So my question for all four of you is, in what ways, perhaps some of them new, perhaps some of them tried and true, have you yourself found joy in the last 18 months since the world shut down because of COVID-19? And in your own pursuit for the joy that fuels us, even in the hardest of times, have you learned any lessons about wellness? Does one of you want to start?
I can start.
Thank you, Rachel. Please go ahead.
Of course. I definitely learned a lot more about myself while in COVID isolation. And I think what really brought me joy were things that I didn't appreciate enough before COVID, the little things and spending quality time with people, even if it's just sitting and talking and just spending that time, I appreciate so much more now. And I don't need to constantly be going out and doing things. I really learned to value and get joy out of knowing that I can talk to people and everything like that. So I think that's definitely changed my perspective a lot, but then it's also made me much more appreciative of when I can go do really fun things with my friends. And when we're able to, when it's safe enough to do so, and I just value that time more and don't take it for granted, that definitely gave me a lot of joy. And a lesson I've learned from wellness is that everyone has a very different definition of wellness. And I learned that it is so important to communicate that with the people around you, what your boundaries are, and to communicate with them, because it will really help you form stronger friendships and connections. And it will show you who your true friends are and who the people you should put in your circle. So I definitely learned that lesson with wellness, is to be vocal, be communicative, and explain your boundaries.
That's a great answer to lead us off. And I just want to tell our audience, which is now at 180, by the way, that I think Candace is just putting the same message in the chat box. We welcome your questions, and we'll make sure to leave time for questions after we've asked our panelists the questions that I've prepared. So think about what you might want to ask of our panelists. Susan, you look like you're ready to jump in. You want to take on this question?
Well, I think Rachel addressed it really beautifully. I think a lot of the things she said is actually what I was thinking. I think gratitude for, or just appreciation for small things. For instance, I met with a student the other day, and I hadn't met with a student in a year and a half in my office. And it was just so joyful to to be with somebody, to be with students again. It's just something, I think we took a lot of things for granted before the pandemic that I just don't take for granted anymore. And another thing along those same lines is my health, right? So I think just being grateful to have health and to be able to be present, to be able to be working and be able to socialize with friends and things like that, I just look at in a new light. So I think that is a lesson as well, is just not taking things for granted. Hopefully that will last and it won't go away soon, but for now, I'm just going to focus on that.
Vicki, my next question is going to be for you. So I'm going to go to Adeem next, if you don't mind. What have you discovered about joy?
So my joy resides in this 3-year-old that I'm raising with my partner. And but it's not just simply watching my daughter grow up. During the pandemic, working from home, I had the opportunity to be more involved in sort of watching her grow. My partner is an ER doctor, so she was, she's a frontline worker, and she was at the forefront of the pandemic response, which meant that I had to spend a lot more time with our daughter. But and so it was an absolute joy watching her discover the world, and from her I learned how little I appreciate these like yesterday we spent like 30 minutes just watching a spider deal with the storm and the rain, and we sang Intimacy Spider like maybe like 15 times during it, but it's just beautiful to sort of allow that spider to center one's consciousness in the present, to be present with that critter that we share this world with, and with my daughter, and that as a shared experience. And so these are small joys in times when things larger than us are sweeping us along, and the world is moving faster than we can fathom, and sometimes we feel helpless to act. And in those moments, these small moments become all the more meaningful, and I've learned to find joy in them.
That's a lucky little girl and a lucky spider, I have to say. Vicki, what about you? What have you discovered? I know, like all the rest of us, you've had your struggles over these last 18 months.
Well, I think Adeem is a perfect lead-in, because I'm on the other end of the spectrum. You know, my kids are all in their 20s, and everyone was home during the pandemic. And, you know, he has young kids, but I have older kids, and just being with them in a different stage of all of our lives. They were home for 5 months, some longer, some much longer. And really getting to reconnect at a stage in their lives and our lives, my husband and I, that we probably would never have had that time. We would never have had that time with them. For them to be adults and living at home and reconnecting with the things that they enjoy doing and what's important to them and who they are. And that's where really the joy came from. My middle son plays many musical instruments, and I actually started taking voice lessons during the pandemic. It just was something that I had always wanted to do, and over Zoom it was possible. And he and I play and sing together, which during this time, which was something we never would have done, never would have had the time to do. So life at the other end of the child spectrum.
All right, first unmuting error of the day for me. Sorry about that. I was a little slow on the uptake here. I expect that there are many, many families who had that unexpected time with young adult children, and that it was actually in many instances, a very positive and unexpected treat to spend time under the same roof together. Vicki, that's a great segue to the question of what you talked about when you did the dialogue session with us all arriving back on campus, with returning students entering on a campus that works differently, with new students not quite sure what to expect yet. How do we actually establish and maintain healthy relationships? I'm struck by how isolated we have been into pods or really in individual isolation for some people. And now we're figuring out how to come back into community. So we've been very fractured and disseminated and dispersed. How do we build those healthy relationships again?
Well, I think that that students coming back either for the first time or after a very disjointed year, first, there's a certain amount of anxiety that you have to recognize that you may be, you have to sort of balance the anxiety and the wish to be together, because really we all want to be together. That's a very motivating factor, that everybody really wants to get together, and we want to go to parties and we want to get together for coffee and get things back to normal. But there is a certain amount of anxiety, not just COVID related, but, how have I changed during this time, at home in a pandemic? I've been, maybe people have been more isolated over the past few months. People probably started getting together more. But, how comfortable am I in certain places? And I think what Rachel said was really well spoken. What have you learned over COVID about yourself? College is a time for really learning about how you are in the world, how you're going to be as an adult. And what have you learned over your time in COVID? What makes you happy? What gives you energy? Are you introvert? Are you extrovert? Do you want to go to parties? Would you rather just have a small group of friends? So maybe taking some of that learning, that self-discovery, and applying it to how now do you want to be on campus? How do you want to structure your life and your friendships? Maybe, fraternity parties aren't your vibe. Maybe they are. What is going to make you happy? What's going to make you feel comfortable? Living with some anxiety of getting out there is it's common. You're not going to get away from some anxiety of, should I be doing this or not doing this? But really kind of putting that aside and saying, I need to get back out in the world and I do need to be with people. It's not healthy to be that afraid, of getting out there and meeting people. And you may have a better sense of who you want to be friends with, and choose your friends and your groups with more knowledge of, are these people similar to me? Am I going to be happy with them? Am I going to feel safe with them?
Vicki, I want to pick up on something that you and Rachel both touched on or suggested, which is the need for pretty frank communication about some of these issues. Rachel, you talked about being really clear about your boundaries and about having those hard conversations with people. Any advice, Vicki, about how we lead into those conversations?
I think I found really you just have to be straight about it. I'm not comfortable going to a large party. Would you rather, do X or Y? I think you just have to be straight about it.
And it means owning your own preferences and your own boundaries. Yeah, exactly. Okay.
Yeah.
So
I mean,
that-
that's not the most, sophisticated answer, I guess, but you have to know in yourself, what really you are comfortable with. Don't put yourself in a position that you feel uncomfortable. And you may find that other people really are not that comfortable either, would rather keep a group small or do an activity that you suggest, and they're just, going along with the group. It's just like any type of, peer pressure. You may find that people aren't as comfortable as you thought they were, but they're trying to put themselves out there. Not to say that you should stay in your room or in your apartment or wherever you are and not go out, but do it in a way that you feel comfortable and you're going to have a good time.
Thanks, Vicki. Susan, you see the full spectrum of how our students are coping with life on campus, and it's going to be a little bit different this year. Last year, we were de-densified. Everybody's feeling stress of one kind or 15 kinds, right? What do you see as the common stressors? Is there anything in what Rachel and Vicki have already said? What stressors are members of the community likely to be feeling right now as we join or return to in-person community with in-person activities, knowing that the pandemic is with us and will be? How do we help address those very real stressors and anxieties for our students?
Well, I think you're right. They have both Vicki and Rachel touched on this new term. Like there's so many new terms that we're adding to our lexicon as a result of this pandemic. And something I've been hearing a lot lately is this concept of re-entry anxiety. And you can actually look this up. It's becoming a thing where when you move from this small bubble of protection and safety, which a lot of us have been in for a year and a half now, and you're starting to venture out into the real world, right? Which is what we're all doing right now on our campus and what our students are doing. So there is a term for this. And I think the key to, and it's a re-entry anxiety, but it really encompasses many different types of anxiety. So I'm thinking, like the health anxiety, which has already been mentioned, as far as like worrying about your own safety in certain environments, balancing that need to feel safe at all times, worrying about your safety in educational settings like the classroom. And then also like this needing to set boundaries, like Vicki was just talking about, and knowing where your boundaries are, and then how do you express those? And then also there's the social anxiety, like how do we be with people again after we've not had that experience for a long time? So social interactions have almost like, it's kind of like, if you haven't ridden a bike in a long time, you'll get it again, but you do have to practice it a little bit, I think. And I think we're all going through that, some level of that right now. And then also just the academic anxiety. I've already heard from a couple of students, like it's strange going from an environment where not much was going on because it couldn't, to all of a sudden, I have all of these things on my plate. There's things going on in my house. There's activities happening around campus. Now classes are starting up. Some, athletes have practices going. So all of a sudden going from almost like 0 to 60 is like, it's a hard transition for a lot of students, and trying to maintain a balance while you're doing that. And then finally, just the mental anxiety, right, of doing that and how it can take a toll on our mental health. And I just wanted to add to, acknowledging that there's things going on outside of our campus in the world politically, and with, larger stressors like climate change that I think we're all feeling the effects of. So it's a lot to balance. And for our students, some of them, I was going to mention that the United States has had the most amount of deaths than any other country. We've now lost over 600,000 people, 630,000 people. And I read somewhere that with loss, for every person who passes, there's about, on average, 10 to 14 people who are impacted by that loss. So the tentacles of the loss that we've gone through as a country and beyond are large, and they're far reaching. So I think that that's just something to be acknowledged, that there is real grief and loss happening with ourselves and with our students. But luckily for our students and for all of our campus members, there are a lot of resources, and I keep just telling students to take advantage of the resources that we have to manage a lot of these things. So we've been telling students to try to get connected if they're already struggling, to get connected with Student Wellness Center. You can call there and make an appointment. It's fairly open right now. They also have a great amount of groups this semester that will be happening over at the Student Wellness Center, and you can look those up on their website. And groups are really great because they lessen social isolation and they help you process things with your peers. So there's a COVID-19 anxiety group actually starting on September 13. I believe a notice has been sent out via email for that, but that will be a great resource for our students trying to process a lot of these things. Take care of our physical selves. So our college has a lot of fitness facilities. We have our track, we have beautiful neighborhoods that we can walk through. So make sure that you're taking care of your physical self and accessing those resources. For our academic wellness, we have academic supports and we have tutoring services. So if you go to our accessibility services webpage, you can find our peer academic coaches that will help students manage their schedules if they are a little worried about that. They're there to help and they're ready. We also have peer health educators, which are students who will speak to students about managing some of the health anxiety that they have, whether it's physical or mental. I think getting involved with student clubs and organizations, like Rachel was saying in our podcast that you mentioned, it's really important to get involved and start meeting people who have similar interests. That's especially true for our first years. And then we do have a wellness committee starting through our student wellness education programs and violence prevention. The WVP office has a wellness committee. So for students who feel really passionate about trying to take control or to offer support to other students around wellness, I encourage them to get involved with that. So there's just so many resources to take advantage of. And I'd say do it now before things start catching up. I know it's busy right now and it's a little overwhelming, but I think being as proactive as possible is key in trying to access these services now before they become a crisis.
And Susan, just for people who haven't used it before, who haven't used it in a while, could you remind people how to use the Dip Cares system?
Yes, how could I forgot Dip Cares. So for general resources, we have our Dip Cares webpage. If you go to our F&M website and you just search Dip Cares, it will come up. And it's broken into parent resources, faculty and staff resources, and then student resources. And if you go to the student resources page, there's a variety of resources depending on the issue that students have going on. And then there's also a referral form that is online. It's very simple. It doesn't need to be super complex. It can come from students. It can come from faculty members and staff members, family members. You can stay anonymous on there if you prefer. And it gets routed to myself and some other members on our Dip Cares team, and we reach out pretty quickly. Depending on what's going on for the student. So that's on our Dip Cares webpage, and thanks for that reminder.
Absolutely, thank you. It's a great system and you've helped so many people that way. So thanks for that. Adeem, I'd like to turn to you if you don't mind. And this is a connection with something that Susan just said, but also that is hovering in the back of all our heads, which is that if COVID-19 were the only thing we were dealing with, it might be a more circumscribed set of challenges. But in fact, we are just so beset by other really dreadful conditions and situations in the world. The tremendously dramatic impact of climate change, floods like we saw here yesterday, fires, the various geopolitical conflicts going on around the globe, political differences and divisions and racial tensions within our own country. All of that is also an almost sort of apocalyptic backdrop to dealing with a pandemic as well. That is, I think, the kind of thing that you will be addressing in the context of this great new course you're offering. What do you say about how we find peace and joy? Is it even possible to find peace and joy for ourselves and for those around us, just given the many extraordinary stressors in the world?
The crises are enormous. The scale is enormous, but I would like to echo something that both Vicki and Susan sort of touched on in such an articulate way, which is that we have been following a certain set of social scripts. We have been following ideas about what we should want, what we should do, how we should do them. And what the pandemic has perhaps laid bare in a very palpable way for all of us is that the old normal was predicated on a lot of suffering. The old normal actually left 600,000 of us absolutely vulnerable, right? In this extremely consequential way. But what that means also is that even as we confront these enormous crises, what we have the opportunity now is to rewrite those scripts with the absolute certainty of knowledge that the old ones kill, that the old ones render us broken and fractured, and even sort of on a personal level, they don't leave us feeling whole. And so we can together now, in the aftermath, as it were, or as we move forward, especially our students who are not only dealing with the present, but are the future. It is in their hands to rewrite new scripts, and they're all primed to do that together. And that's where I place most of my hope and something to look forward to, even as we face these challenges that you just listed. Now, that being said, the Louisiana is on my mind right now. The suffering in Afghanistan, everything that you sort of listed, sort of we have very, very palpable examples of all of them. But here's the thing about crises. In crises, every small act becomes that much more meaningful. Perhaps never before, if we're beset with all these crises, perhaps never before have the smallest of choices, the choice to take on the minor inconvenience of wearing a mask has been so much more meaningful, right? And that should also give us perhaps some hope that today, now, even the smallest thing that we do can change somebody's life, can actually mean the difference between life and death, is that much more consequential. And that should give us impetus and energy to move forward and go ahead and do those things together.
That's the recipe for avoiding paralysis in the face of everything that we're facing and the overwhelming nature of it, really. Thank you. And that's actually a great bridge to what I wanted to ask Rachel, which is moving from that global understanding of what the individual can do to make a difference and how important it is that we actually do those things at the same time as we're rewriting those big scripts. Rachel, what is it that you think that you would advise students here on campus? You've thought this through. You're very thoughtful on this topic. What do you think that students can do in the context of college, first, second, junior, senior year, to avoid burnout, to avoid letting stress just paralyze them? What would you suggest?
First of all, you are definitely not alone. I think a lot of us have the same type of anxieties about COVID, school, shifting from a module system to a semester system. There are so many different stressors, and we really all have that in common, which can be, you can kind of find comfort in that fact. Some great advice I did receive last year from the Student Wellness Center was that you can't control the people around you. You can only control yourself, your actions, and how you react. And that sentiment is very, very helpful in a lot of situations, but I found it specifically helpful for me through navigating college during COVID. For example, if your friend wants to go to an event that you don't feel comfortable attending, whether that be for safety reasons or what have you, you can only control what you do. So whether that means you not going, you distancing yourself from that friend for a bit, you wearing a mask around them for the 2 weeks, whatever makes you feel comfortable and what you can control. Because if you try to control the people around you, it'll just lead to resentment. And since everyone has a very different definition of safety, that's really important to remember. And all you can control is yourself. So that definitely helped a lot of my anxiety. And it's something I remind myself and my friends constantly. I would also definitely recommend using the 8 free counseling sessions we get each semester. And if not more, if possible for you, I utilize those. And it was definitely one of the best decisions I could have ever made. The services here are fabulous, and the therapists really genuinely care about you. And that's actually how I got that original piece of advice, which I carry with me all the time. And then for burnout, academic burnout, I definitely would prioritize self-care alongside your schoolwork and making sure that you do set aside time for yourself and time to do things that you enjoy, whether that be going to the gym, taking a nap, doing club activities that you really love. Definitely prioritize that as well, because that's also what college is about. It's about learning how to time manage, what your strengths are, how you can still manage your time in an effective way, but not be burnt out. And along with that, the professors here are there for you. And if you're vocal with them, kind of back to that communication thing, if you tell them that you're really overwhelmed with everything going on, they are very receptive to it. And if they know that, then they can work on something with you, either help tutor you or assign you a tutor or any other type of advice they can give you. It's so much nicer, and you really form a close-knit relationship with your professors that way. I would also recommend just other tutoring services like the Writing Center. They were definitely my lifeline last year, and any other type of tutoring. I know we have a bunch of different services, and just not being afraid of asking for help. And the last thing I would say is to not be afraid to say no to different activities or events. If you're feeling really overwhelmed, a lot of times I'll make a list of everything I'm involved in and kind of see what I can cut down on, see if I could take a little break from something. I know a lot of people at F&M do that. I feel like F&M is full of overachievers who like to do all the things all the time. And I think there's a lot of power in saying, I'm going to take a break from this for a while I'm dealing with the stress of COVID on top of everything. So that's a lot of different types of advice, but that is something that's definitely helped me a lot, and hopefully it'll help some of you.
You've all been great at offering coping strategies. And I'm going to throw out one more question that I didn't tell you ahead of time, but this is a big preoccupation of mine. And just before we open up to the audience to ask questions of all 4 or any of the 4 of you, I wanted to put this out there. I've been so struck by something that actually this is triggered up by something Rachel said about you can't control the people around you. I've been struck by the fact that there's very little generosity of spirit in public discourse or even in private discourse these days. And given that most of us don't have any control over the larger circumstances dictating what our lives are like at the moment, I'm seeing a lot of really belligerent, ungraceful communications where we seem to be taking it out on each other. Have you got any good advice about what to do in the face of someone who's not bringing their higher self to a conversation, probably for very good reasons, because they're tired and frightened and anxious and worried and have been deprived of all of the things that they normally used to have? What do we do in some of those less than pleasant altercations when someone's looking for a modicum of control and taking it out on somebody else? Any last minute suggestions on that? Anybody who wants to jump in?
I'll jump in on that. I think you got to try to take it down a level rather than argue with the person or escalate it. What Rachel has said, everyone is going through so much anxiety in their own way, about the many things that are happening in the world today, and including COVID and on campus. F&M's a stressful place. I think I'm the only alum on the panel, but F&M was stressful when I was there, and I can imagine it's really stressful now. Everyone's going through their own anxiety, and it's best to step back, let that person go through what they're going through, and really not so much engage in the argument, or not get involved in that person's escalation of the argument or the situation, which I think is, I'm thinking that's what you're saying. If someone's really giving you a hard time because you don't want to wear a mask, or you don't want to go to a party or whatever, that's the expression of their anxiety. And so don't engage in that, and stay firm in your beliefs of what makes you feel comfortable.
Very wise. Thanks, Vicki. Susan, Adeem, anything to add?
Yes, I do. I was thinking about, if it's possible, I think always waiting to respond, if that's possible. Obviously, it's in the moment. I think the better thing to do is to not respond. I reminded of a saying that my therapist has always told me, which is, I think, by Viktor Frankl, which is, between stimulus and response, there is space or freedom. And so I'm trying to remember that as I find myself in my own moments where someone said something that's really upsetting. And trying to find that space is really important. Like, if you have any space where you don't have to respond, then that's a blessing. I think the other thing I would add too is just knowing yourself and your patterns is really important. So if you know that you haven't been sleeping, or you know that you're exhausted, or maybe you're feeling just a little bit touchy that day, just be aware of that, right? And take stock of that when you wake up, or take stock of that regularly throughout the day. So you know that just right now is not a good time to be engaging with people in those kinds of conversations. Again, sometimes we don't have that choice, but I think that as much as possible, taking those breaks, putting that space in between how you'll respond. And then I think too, like social media, right? Like, I found for myself personally, social media can aggravate sometimes. Like, if there is a day that's not going well, sometimes we need to take breaks from engaging in that conversation with other people, and don't go back to it until like you feel like you're in a good space and you can handle what you're about to see or read. So I think it's just about kind of learning ourselves and our patterns and our own behaviors, and trying as much as possible to stay grounded in that place, and take big breaths.
Big breaths. Yes. Adeem, any last words?
No, Susan and Vicki covered it. I personally practice the big breaths as well, which is in any given situation, especially these days, you don't know where the other person is coming from, or what kind of sort of mental state they're coming to any given encounter with. And so anytime some kind of a tension arises, take 10 breaths. Don't react to it immediately. Take a step back from the situation. This is not about the imposition of wills, but to share a space with somebody, right? And just take a step back, take care of your own self, and then return to the situation and realize, okay, how am I going to react to this now? And if you take those 10 breaths, those 10 big breaths, chances are you're going to respond to it in a way that the other person will be taking those 10 breaths to be primed for a more amenable situation between the two of you. And that has worked for me personally a lot.
I love that we've used very, very practical examples of things that we can actually do multiple times a day. If all four panelists, Vicki, if you don't mind coming back on screen as well, I'd like to open to questions. Thank you, Candace Roper, for asking for questions, and Rachel Anderson-Rayburn, if you have any ready to go. I think our panelists are ready to answer.
We do. We have quite a few that are ready to go. So I'll start passing them forward, and you can decide if you all want to address the same question or if you want one person to take it at a time. It is your call. So this first one is from a faculty member. I often feel pulled between two very different worlds. Here on campus, people generally take the pandemic, health precautions, and personal safety very seriously, while in the small town I live and have a leadership role in, the opposite is generally true. And people don't always believe those things are important, and they actively rebel against public safety guidelines. Any tips on how to manage the mental whiplash and sometimes anger I frequently feel when transitioning between these parts of life?
Panelists, I'm just going to invite you to jump in if you'd like to address a particular question.
Well, I think living in Lancaster, I understand where you're coming from. I'm sure most towns are similar, where you have people who are taking this seriously and maybe not taking it seriously. I think what was really talked about before is staying true to yourself and your feeling of wellness, what makes you comfortable. If going to some stores where not everyone is abiding by the rules is uncomfortable, don't do it. Again, this was said before, we're not going to change people. We're not going to be able to enter into a conversation with somebody who we don't think is behaving in the way that they should behave, because that's what we believe. So you have to take care of yourself. You have to do what makes you feel safe and comfortable. In my opinion, I mean, you're not going to change, just like Rachel said, you're not going to change other people. So take care of yourself.
I'd like to add to something that I found helpful is having visuals or like little rituals. So, like your certain hat is on here. And then when you go to a different environment, then you need to put on a different hat. I had a job once where the whiplash between my work environment and my home environment was very extreme. And so my supervisor at that time used to tell me to have a visual of, like actual case files flying out the back. I will never forget that, because it was helpful to have like a conscious switch to this new environment. And you just got to wear a different hat in some places.
I wonder what to make of that, thinking about how in this sort of COVID era, so many of us have had those hats collapse into one another. If you have anything to say sort of along the lines of how it can be increasingly difficult to differentiate between the domestic space and the professional space.
I'll say that it confirms what you're talking about, those worlds collapsing into each other, Rachel. For me, it makes ever more important stating very clearly which hat I'm wearing at a given moment. So right now I'm talking to you as X, or right now I've stepped out of that role and I'm really just addressing you as a friend. So I've found that it's helpful for me, even if not necessarily for my interlocutor, just to say, right now we're talking about this thing in this context, even no matter what the backdrop is. Any other ideas on that one?
I've definitely been there. I think a lot of the students have, especially last year with all Zoom classes, where our bedrooms are also our classrooms. So I think that also reiterates the value of setting aside self-care time, or using other campus resources, using the library if that's available to you, or setting up an area of your room where this is where I'm going to be if I'm studying, this is where I'm going to be if I'm relaxing. But it definitely does blur the lines, and you have to make kind of a conscious effort to make sure you're leaving time for yourself and for the fun things, and not just school.
Thank you for inviting us into your home, by the way, Rachel. We appreciate
Of course.
This is I'll bring another question from a staff member, which I think is related to the question of boundaries that we've kind of begun to circle around. How can those who work closely with others on campus set their very literal boundaries and ask for what they need when working with people who, for example, might have a mask that keeps falling below their nose, or who aren't wearing a mask when they should be?
Who wants to go? I'll start. I think we all need to be much braver about saying, could you please pull that mask up over your nose? It's not something that we should leave to others. It's something that should be okay to ask. And I think the more of us who ask it, the more okay it's going to be. Panelists, help me out here.
I mean, I think
I agree. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, it would help if that's an expectation, right? And that if all of our supervisors and our colleagues on campus make sure that we're being conscious about that and kind of repeating the message as much as we can.
Vicki?
That's what I was going to say. Making sure that the policy is clear, that everyone knows what to do, and like you said, really, I was going to say the same thing. Making it clear that you need to wear your mask in the space if you're going to be with me, with other people. This is what the policy is.
I think this may also be, sorry, go on.
No, you go ahead.
Well, I think this may also be a time where in all of our spaces, we may define, maybe informally, how leadership may work in any given workspace, right? And it may not sort of conform to formal leadership, but say if you're working with a bunch of peers, within peers, there's always somebody who is respected, who is friendly. There's always a person that everybody listens to and looks up to. And I think it's time that sort of one identifies oneself as that, or identifies one person who takes it upon themselves in these exceptional times to actually bring the whole community together and sort of to take them together. Often the policies are clear, but you can't tell your peer to sort of fix their mask. But if we all decide together that there's this one person that everybody likes, who is the sort of de facto leader in that given space, they should take it upon themselves to make sure that everybody feels comfortable around them.
And I'll just add that I work hard at not assuming that the person's doing it on purpose, right? Leading in with, I know it's a real pain in the neck and those masks always slip, but would you mind putting it up about over your nose or under your chin again? What else, Rachel, as we get close to the hour, the half hour?
Yes, there are. We'll see if we can get a couple more in there. This is from a faculty member. Interactions among faculty, staff, and students can sometimes be a bit stratified from one another. We all have specific roles in relation to one another at the college. How can we, from our distinct demographics and roles within our collective community, enact mutual support that's not just about faculty and staff supporting students, but support moving in all kinds of directions?
Great question. Anybody want to jump in on this one? I'll start by saying I think it's a great idea to acknowledge that it's a very unusual time and that we're all extremely interdependent. The interdependencies of COVID management transgress and cut across and undo all of those boundaries in really important ways. Susan, you were about to say something.
I was just going to say, modeling that in your classroom, right? Like, what are ways where you can even start breaking down some of that stratification, encouraging peer-to-peer support, encouraging your students to share with you what they've learned. They have something to teach you. So like having a little bit of humility around that, and modeling that in your syllabus and in your interactions with it starts in, I think a lot of times it starts in the classroom and in our, in our houses.
I have made it a point, having been teaching these past 18 months, to take the first 5 to 10 minutes of each class and talk to students about how they're feeling that day, what their week has been like, the stressful things in their lives, the fun things in their lives, just to sort of get a gauge on sort of if they're primed to receive what I'm about to sort of, unveil in the class, as it were. And I think that really, really helps them, because that's also a moment in which students can actually really even think through what they're feeling when they're showing up to class. And I think it's a practice that has worked really well for me.
Rachel, do you want to try to get in one last question with rapid fire answers?
Utterly crazy, and I'm going to offer a couple comments so y'all can relax and mute yourselves, but keep your cameras on so we can see these comments reflected in your faces towards our audience. So these are just some comments. This is one from a faculty member. I've been very happy to see my students in person this week. I have almost been moved to tears to see how grateful, how enthusiastic, how happy they are to be learning in the classroom again and to reconnect with faculty and students. And this is from a staff member, a comment, I truly missed my F&M family, and it feels really great to see everyone on campus again. We need this.
That is the perfect last line of our hour. Thank you, Rachel, for going to those comments. We need this. This is why we're back. Rachel, do you want to close us out? Let me thank the panelists. Let me thank Emily. Let me thank the organizers. Thank you, Rachel. Thank you, everyone who has participated, and Candace for asking for questions. Professor Anderson Rayburn, I'll let you close us out.
I will close us out with a thank you to President Altmann for this excellent conversation and topic, which I'm sure will be ongoing for some time, and we can keep having this conversation. Everyone else, thank you so much for joining us for Common Hour, our very first one of the academic year, and we look forward to seeing you next week, next Thursday at 11:30 for a brief screening of Diamond's Dream, followed by a conversation with Director Jarrell Henderson.